They wanted me silent. They wanted me helpless. They wanted me tucked away in some nursing home while they carved up everything I'd built. But I wasn't sick, and I sure as hell wasn't done. The first time I saw the papers, my hands went cold. Medical evaluations. Signatures I never made. A thick stamp of cognitive decline, guardianship recommended right across the top. My own son Daniel had signed as a witness. My daughter, Claire, filed them at the courthouse like it was routine. I sat at the kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd once helped them with algebra homework, staring at the forged letters that spelled out my funeral in slow motion. Outside, the November wind rattled the gutters, but the real storm was right there in my house. Through the heating vent above me, their voices carried. Claire's voice, tight with excitement. Once the judge approves guardianship, we control everything. He won't even have a checkbook. Daniel's reply was cooler, smug. Dr. Harris already filed the report. Dad's finished. Dr. Harris. My doctor. My so-called friend. A man I'd once pulled out of a smoking Buick, blood pouring from his head. I saved his life. And this was the thanks, selling mine like scrap. I forced my breathing study. My reflection in the darkened window looked like an old man. Wrinkled, tired, frail. Perfect camouflage. Let them believe I was slipping. Let them think the trap was working. Because what they didn't know was simple. I'd already laid a trap of my own. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. Morning sunlight cut through the blinds in pale stripes, painting my living room like prison bars. I sat in my recliner, coffee cooling on the table, pretending to read the newspaper. My daughter, Claire, floated into the room in her silk robe, moving too quickly for someone who was supposed to be worried about her father's health. She leaned over my shoulder, voice sugary. Dad, maybe you shouldn't bother with the paper. It'll just confuse you. I blinked slowly, like her words had landed. Then I let the paper slide from my hands onto the carpet. She smiled, satisfied. Inside, my chest burned. They wanted an act? Fine. I'd give them the performance of a lifetime. The first step of revenge is patience. I spent days letting them think I was drifting. I asked Daniel the same question twice. I forgot my keys in the fridge. I called the dog by the wrong name. Every slip I made was calculated, every stumble rehearsed. At night, in the silence of my room, I wrote down everything I'd heard, every phrase, every whisper. My notebooks became evidence. And when I filled one, I locked it in a drawer only I knew how to open. 2 days later, Daniel stood in the kitchen whispering into his phone. He thought I was asleep in the recliner. But the old air vent carried every word. Harris says the petition's almost through. By next week, the judge will grant guardianship. Once that happens, the accounts are ours. His laugh was short, sharp, cruel. The old man's gone. He just doesn't know it yet. Gone? I nearly laughed out loud. I wasn't gone. I was sharpening. I started small. I called an old friend from my Rotary Club, a retired lawyer named Walter Green. We hadn't spoken in years, but when he heard the weight in my voice, he didn't hesitate. Meet me tomorrow. Bring copies of everything. His words were clipped, decisive. That was what I needed, someone who knew the law, someone who hated liars as much as I did. That night, Claire entered my study without knocking. She fiddled with the papers on my desk, her eyes scanning for anything valuable. I sat in the armchair by the window, keeping my breathing shallow, pretending to nap. She didn't notice the tiny red light on the bookshelf camera I'd bought years ago after a break and scare. She had no idea she'd just given me footage of her rummaging through her own father's drawers. The house itself began to feel like a stage set. Every corner carried whispers of their plotting. At dinner, they spoke about helping me transition. In the mornings, Claire left brochures for retirement homes on the counter by accident. At night, Daniel rehearsed his testimony, muttering to himself about Dad's declining state. And I played my role. I nodded. I stumbled. I forgot. But behind the mask, I was building a case. The real turning point came when I overheard Daniel on the phone again. Yes, Harris, once Dad's declared incompetent, the bank will release the assets. Don't worry, your cut's already in motion. Your cut. That single phrase lit a fire in my veins. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a conspiracy. My doctor, my son, my daughter, each had carved out a piece of my life like vultures circling carrion. I stared at the old family photo above the mantel, Claire at 12, Daniel at 9, me holding their shoulders, my wife smiling in the sunlight. Once, I thought I'd built a fortress of love around them. Now it was a prison of greed. They believed I was blind. They believed I was weak. But the truth was simple. I'd already begun to turn their own game against them. And soon, they'd discover the price of underestimating the old man they thought was fading away. The first strike had to be silent, invisible. If they suspected too soon, the whole plan would collapse. So I kept up my act, shuffling through the house, misplacing my glasses, mumbling the wrong day of the week. Daniel and Claire were convinced the dementia was settling in. They whispered about memory lapses while I sat in the next room, every word seared into my mind like a brand. But while they thought I was slipping, I was preparing. On Thursday morning, I drove to Walter Green's office in a part of town they never visited. The air outside smelled like rain-soaked asphalt, sharp and clean. Walter's office was small, lined with shelves sagging under the weight of law books. He looked at the documents I'd brought, copies of forged signatures, Harris's false evaluation, the guardianship petition. His frown deepened with each page. "Robert, this isn't just fraud," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "This is conspiracy. If you wanted to, you could bury them all." I leaned forward. "I don't just want to. I need to." Walter nodded. "Then you'll need evidence that even a judge can't ignore. Hidden recordings, financial trails, paperwork you never signed." I slid a USB drive across his desk. Inside were files from the hidden camera footage in my study. Claire rummaging through my drawers. Daniel reading my bank statements when he thought I was asleep. Their betrayal captured in crisp detail. Walter's eyes lit up. "This is gold." That night, I returned home and pretended exhaustion, dragging my feet across the hardwood floors. But once the house settled into silence, I slipped into the basement. The furnace hummed, filling the air with dry heat. I pulled out an old lockbox I hadn't opened in years. Inside were receipts, notarized letters, and, most important, my wife's handwritten note, signed before her death, stating clearly that the house and all assets were mine alone. Not joint, not transferable. Mine. I pressed the paper flat on the workbench, hands trembling. They hadn't counted on this. They thought everything was already in their grip. They had no idea I'd kept one final shield buried under decades of dust. The next day, Claire tried her usual game. She accidentally left brochures for Silver Pines assisted living on the kitchen counter, her handwriting circling memory care unit. I lifted the paper with shaky fingers, stared at it, then let it flutter back down like I didn't understand. "Dad," she said gently, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You'd be so much safer there. Meals, nurses, friends. Doesn't that sound nice?" I smiled faintly, eyes unfocused. "Maybe, if you think so, sweetheart." She patted my hand, convinced she'd won. I wanted to laugh in her face, but I held it in. That evening, Daniel stormed into the living room with a briefcase. "Dad, I just need you to sign a few things." Routine banking. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, watching me for hesitation. He slid the papers across the table, forms transferring authority over my accounts. My fingers hovered over the pen. My heart thumped, steady and hard. I picked it up, let my hand wobble like an old man's, and scratched something that looked like my signature. He didn't even check closely. He just smiled, satisfied, snapping the papers back into the case. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the pen I used had a hidden camera, recording every move. Their voices, their instructions, the very moment they thought they'd secured control, it was all stored, time-stamped, undeniable. Later that night, I sat in my study replaying the footage. Daniel's smug voice. Perfect. He'll never know what he just signed. Claire's laughter. Evidence, clean and sharp. The trap was tightening, but not around me. I stared at the dark window, my reflection staring back. I looked tired, worn, but my eyes were alive. Fierce. "They think I'm finished," I whispered to the empty room. But this is just the opening move. And outside, the November wind howled like it was on my side. The house had that Sunday stillness, the kind that presses on your ears until the smallest sound feels like a hammer. Claire sat in the kitchen whispering into her phone, the blinds shaking every time she turned. Daniel slammed drawers in my study, pretending to look for batteries. But I knew the rhythm, panic dressed up as busywork. The transfer flagged, Claire hissed, voice sharp as broken glass. "No, I don't care if it's policy. The account's in his name, and I'm his daughter." Dr. Harris already certified his condition. Her face, when she hung up, was pale around the edges. Good. That was Walter's fraud alert working. 3 days earlier, I'd signed a Sentinel trust. My house, savings, brokerage accounts, all moved beyond their reach. Major Delgado, a woman whose stare could freeze a hurricane, was now the trustee. My kids could knock all they wanted. The bank would demand my live signature and hers. And the one thing I wasn't signing was my life away. At lunch, Claire dropped a bowl of soup in front of me. "Eat," she said, like a prison guard handing rations. I stirred it slow. "I forgot the word for spoon this morning," I muttered. Her lips curved. Not with sympathy, with satisfaction. She thought the net was tightening. That night, the house was too quiet. I sat in my chair, the old dog breathing at my feet, and listened through the vent. Daniel's voice floated down. "If Harris doesn't push the order, we're sunk." He promised. Push the order. That's what my friend was calling it now, nudging a judge, bending the law until it snapped. I clenched my fists until the leather armrest squeaked. The next morning I shaved clean, put on a blue shirt that still held its color, and drove to Dr. Patel's office across town. She wasn't Harris. She didn't owe me a favor from 30 years ago. She owed only the truth. 2 hours of tests later, word lists, clock drawings, remembering the waitress's bad cat joke from 3 nights ago, she gave me the report, fully competent. No impairment whatsoever. And she promised to file it directly with the court. When I walked out, the air felt sharper, colder. I held something stronger than anger now. Proof. By Tuesday evening, their plan began to splinter. Claire stormed into my study, eyes blazing. "Did you change the accounts?" "The bank said a trustee's blocking us." I looked at her blankly. I was looking for my slippers. Her jaw tightened. "Don't play games. We have a hearing next week." "And where is that again?" I asked, feigning confusion. She gave me the courtroom number without hesitation. People always do when they think you're too weak to use it. That night, I walked the block in the cold. Mrs. Holloway across the street waved from her trash bins. "Need a ride somewhere, Mr. Reeves? My nephew's a cop." I smiled. "I'll let you know." Wednesday morning, the knock came. Not gentle. Official. A deputy in brown stood on my porch with a woman carrying a leather briefcase. "Mr. Robert Reeves," the deputy said, handing me a thick packet. "Emergency order. Temporary stay. Subpoenas for Dr. Harris, Daniel Reeves, and Claire Whitman. Hearing tomorrow, 9 a.m. The woman extended her hand. "Ms. Delgado, court-appointed trustee." Behind me, I could feel Claire and Daniel stiffen. The skillet on the stove hissed and went silent. I laid the order on the kitchen table. The dog thumped his tail once against the floor. My children stared at the papers like they were seeing fire for the first time. And then another knock. Softer. Reluctant. I opened the door again. Dr. Harris stood there, powder blue tie trembling in the evening wind, a folder clutched tight in his hand. "Robert," he whispered, eyes darting to the deputy's car. "We need to talk." I stepped aside just far enough for him to see the bold stamp on the order. His face drained of color. "Tomorrow," I said, my voice flat. Under oath. Behind me, Claire's voice broke. "Dad, what did you do?" I turned, let my words fall like ice. I remembered. The courthouse smelled of old wood and coffee that had been sitting on a burner since dawn. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, catching dust motes that hung like tiny verdicts in the air. I walked in steady, cane tapping on marble, the blue shirt crisp against my chest. Behind me, Daniel and Claire trailed like children being marched to the principal's office. Dr. Harris was already there, pale, sweating, clutching his briefcase like a life raft. The clerk called my name. In the matter of Reeves' guardianship, docket 23 to 741. My name, my life, stripped to a line on paper. Judge Lang looked down over his glasses. Let's begin. Claire jumped in first, voice trembling with rehearsed concern. Your Honor, we filed this petition for guardianship because our father has shown repeated signs of cognitive decline. Forgetting dates, leaving the stove on, becoming confused about his finances, I sat still, letting her bury herself in her lies. Daniel picked up the thread. We love him, but he's vulnerable. Dr. Harris evaluated him personally. His report shows significant impairment. The judge turned to Harris. Doctor, is that accurate? Harris cleared his throat. His fingers twitched against his folder. Yes, Your Honor. Based on my assessment, Mr. Reeves' objection. Walter Green, my attorney, stood, his voice like gravel under boots. Before this court accepts Dr. Harris's testimony, we have evidence of misconduct. The judge raised an eyebrow. Go on. Walter plugged in a small device. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then my pen camera's recording filled the air, Harris sliding a pre-filled form across my table, his voice silky and false. Don't worry, just sign. Families need structure. Gasps rippled through the room. Claire's face went white. Daniel's jaw clenched. Walter didn't pause. He held up another report. Your Honor, here is Dr. Patel's evaluation. Board-certified neuropsychologist. 2 hours of formal testing. It concludes Mr. Reeves has full capacity, no signs of impairment. This directly contradicts Dr. Harris's claim. Judge Lang leaned forward, his voice hard. Dr. Harris, care to explain this discrepancy? Harris swallowed. His tie looked tighter by the second. It must be a mistake. Perhaps my notes, or perhaps your loyalty to these two petitioners outweighed your duty to the truth, Walter cut in. The judge slammed his gavel once. Enough. I'll decide that. Claire leaned forward, desperate. Dad, please, we're just trying to help. My voice echoed sharper than I intended. I stood, cane firm against the floor. You wanted my house. You wanted my money. You wanted me gone. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. Daniel sat stiff, staring daggers at me like he could will me silent. Walter laid the final blow on the table, a stack of bank statements, notarized, showing the Sentinel Trust. Every asset Mr. Reeves owns is already protected. Even if guardianship were granted, his children would have no access. This petition is moot. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, almost sweet. Finally, Judge Lang leaned back. His gavel hit wood. Petition denied. Guardianship request dismissed with prejudice. This court further orders an investigation into Dr. Harris's conduct. Mr. Reeves, you retain full control of your affairs. Claire gasped. Daniel muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. Harris closed his eyes like a man hearing a death sentence. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately. The dog at home would need walking. The air outside would smell cleaner than it had in months. But just as I turned to leave, Daniel's voice cut through the courtroom. Low, seething. This isn't over, Dad. I stopped at the door, turned just enough to meet his eyes. My voice was calm, cold. It already is. Or so I thought. Because what waited at my doorstep that evening proved otherwise. By the time I got home, the courthouse smell of old paper and shame was still in my nose. The dog met me at the door, tail thumping against the wall, sensing the storm but grateful I was still standing. I dropped my folder on the table, poured a glass of water, and thought maybe, just maybe, the nightmare had cracked open and sunlight was finally coming through. Then I saw it. A single envelope slid under my front door. No stamp, no return address. Just my name written in a hand I knew too well, Daniel's impatient scrawl, the R always leaning forward like it wanted to run away. Inside was one line, paper shields won't stop what's coming. No signature. No need. I stood there, water glass sweating in my palm, and felt the old training settle into my bones. This wasn't about guardianship anymore. This was about pressure, intimidation, maybe worse. At dusk, headlights lingered too long outside my house. A black sedan with tinted windows idled at the curb, then crept away when I stepped onto the porch. The night smelled of cut grass and gasoline, sharp and warning. I locked every door, checked every window. Then I pulled the .38 revolver Ellen had insisted I keep after the break-in years ago, the steel cool in my hand. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked older than I felt: lined face, tired eyes, but jaw set like granite. Around midnight, the phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, breath steady. Old man, Daniel's voice hissed, distorted but unmistakable. You think a judge changes anything? You embarrassed us. You ruined everything. Do you know what that means? Silence stretched between us, sharp as wire. It means you'd better start sleeping with one eye open. The line went dead. For a moment, only the tick of the grandfather clock filled the house. Then a new sound, glass shattering in the backyard. I spun toward the kitchen, heart hammering, revolver raised. A brick lay on the floor, shards of my window glittering around it like ice. Taped to the brick was another note. Next time, it won't be the window. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Ellen's old recliner, revolver across my lap, the dog curled at my feet, listening to every creak and whisper of the house. Anger burned hotter than fear. My children, my blood, had escalated from betrayal to threat. By morning, I had a new plan. The courtroom had exposed their lies. Now it was time to expose their desperation. I called Walter. I need to know everything about Daniel's deaths. Every loan, every card, every whisper. He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice came back, grim. You're sure you want to see what's under that rock? I've been living under it for months, I said. It's time to flip it over. That afternoon, Walter's files landed on my desk. Pages of red ink, late notices, collection calls. But one name jumped out at me like a snake in tall grass: Marlowe Security Group. A private firm. The kind of people you hire when debt collectors aren't scary enough. Daniel hadn't just dug a hole. He'd invited wolves into it. And now they were circling my house. I set the file down, hand steady. My children thought they were predators. They thought an old man couldn't bite back. They were about to learn otherwise. Because the next move would be mine. The storm broke on a Thursday night. I'd spent the day cleaning my revolver, checking locks, rehearsing what I'd say when the wolves finally bared their teeth. By dusk, the house smelled of gun oil and strong coffee, the kind that keeps your veins sharp. The dog paced the hallway, unsettled. He knew. Animals always know. At 9:12, headlights carved across my yard. A black SUV rolled up slow, engine rumbling like a growl. 3 men got out, all bulk and shadows, their jackets stiff at the hips where iron usually sat. Behind them, Daniel climbed out of the passenger seat, his face pale in the porch light, but jaw clenched with borrowed bravado. Claire wasn't there. She was too smart or too cowardly. They didn't knock. They surrounded my porch, Daniel stepping forward like a messenger boy for hired muscle. Dad, he called, voice shaking more than he wanted. Let's talk. I opened the door, revolver visible at my side but not raised. Funny way of asking for a conversation. One of the suits, a square-shouldered brute with a scar under his eye, smirked. We're just here to make sure debts get settled. Quick. Quiet. Daniel swallowed hard. Just sign over the house, Dad. It's easier this way. No more fighting. I stepped onto the porch, cool night air biting my skin. So this is it? You drag strangers to my door because you don't have the guts to face your own failure. His eyes flickered, shame trying to surface before rage drowned it. You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, I snapped. You chose greed. You chose to sell me out. The scarred man cut in. Enough family therapy. We're leaving with a signature, or we're leaving with something else. His hand drifted toward his hip. That's when the floodlights I'd rigged in the backyard roared to life, bathing the porch in brutal white. The men froze, startled. Across the street, 2 unmarked sedans rolled up, Walter's friends from the DA's office. They stepped out slow, badges catching the glare. I let the silence stretch, then lifted a small black device from my pocket. A recorder. Red light blinking. Everything you said tonight, I told Daniel, my voice steady, has been captured. Every threat, every demand. Daniel's face drained. You set us up. No, son. You set yourself up. I just press record. The DA's men moved in. The suits tried to bluster, but the law had teeth sharper than theirs tonight. Scarface spat on the ground as they cuffed him. Old man, you don't know the people we work for. I leaned close, eyes cold. And you don't know the people I served with. Pray we never meet again. Daniel didn't fight when they bound his wrists. He just stared at me, hollow, muttering, we're family. You can't do this. I met his eyes one last time. Family doesn't break their own blood for pocket change. As they dragged him toward the car, Claire appeared at the end of the street, headlights sweeping her pale face. She didn't step closer. She just watched, silent, as her brother disappeared into the night. Inside, the house felt different. The air clearer, the silence honest. I sat in Ellen's old chair, revolver on the table, recorder still blinking red. But as the clock struck midnight, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A voice I didn't recognize rasped through the line. You think you've won. Daniel was just the first. The debt still stands. And now it's yours. The line went dead. I sat in the dark, dog at my feet, the weight of new war settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just family anymore. This was something larger, dirtier, more dangerous. And I wasn't done fighting. Not by a long shot. The call lit a fire I hadn't felt since my army days. Whoever that voice was, they thought they could transfer my son's rotten debts onto me like passing a disease. They were wrong. I had spent a lifetime outsmarting men who thought power was measured in threats. By morning, Walter and I were in his office, papers spread across oak like a battlefield map. Phone records, debt ledgers, corporate filings. At the center, Marlowe Security Group. Not just a collection agency, a front. Dirty money flowed through them, washing gambling debts into real estate scams and shell companies. And Daniel, my own flesh, had signed as a guarantor on one of their investment pools. My name was scribbled on the paperwork too, forged as neatly as Harris's medical report. Walter whistled low. This isn't just fraud. This is organized crime. Good, I said flat. Means they'll bleed when sunlight hits them. The plan came together faster than even I expected. A man learns things in 70-plus years: patience, discipline, the value of timing. I contacted Patel, the honest doctor, who filed her own affidavit condemning Harris's falsified evaluation. Then I walked into the DA's office with the recorder from my porch. They listened, stone-faced, as Daniel's voice filled the room, begging me to sign, threatening me when I didn't. When it ended, the DA leaned back, folded his hands, and said, Mr. Reeves, we're about to make some people very uncomfortable. 2 weeks later, uncomfortable exploded into chaos. Headlines screamed about Marlowe security, fraud, racketeering, money laundering. A full sweep. Harris lost his license overnight. His face on the evening news looked 10 years older, sweat soaking his collar as reporters shouted questions. Daniel was dragged into court, shackles on his wrists, his expensive suit traded for an orange jumpsuit. Claire sat in the gallery, pale as bone, her eyes darting to me as if begging for rescue. I gave her nothing. She'd chosen her side. When the judge read the charges, conspiracy, fraud, attempted elder exploitation, Daniel slumped, all fight drained. Dad, he croaked across the courtroom, his voice breaking like glass. Please. I'm your son. I stood, cane firm on the tile, and answered the only way I could. You stopped being my son the moment you sold me. The courtroom went silent. Even the judge didn't interrupt. That night, back home, I sat in Ellen's old chair, the dog at my feet, the news murmuring about the arrests. The house was mine again, quiet, steady, honest. I poured a glass of whiskey, the kind Ellen always said was too strong, and stared at the photo of her on the mantel. You'd have liked this ending, I told her softly. Justice, clean and final. Outside, winter wind rattled the windows, but it didn't sound threatening anymore. It sounded like applause. I raised the glass, swallowed fire, and let the last line settle on my tongue like steel. They thought I'd forget. But I remember everything. If this story kept you on the edge, Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and write in the comments if something like this has ever happened in your life. I'd love to hear your stories. Thank you for watching.